Hi, welcome back. Sorry for the long pause. Certainly been no shortage of things on my mind, and even as I am speaking, I haven't really thought about which subject to tackle. But the subject of the day, well, there are many, but I think vaccines seems to be uh, sort of on the top of everyone's mind right now. And I want to express my feelings and thoughts about vaccines um, because the ideas I have about it don't seem to be getting any traction. I haven't really heard anybody else make the points that I have made about vaccines. Why one would argue in favor and why one would argue against, and for both to be perfectly legitimate. I personally have a strong objection to interference with evolution and survival. Now, not an absolute objection. All creatures interfere in some way with their evolution by the mating preferences that they make, or even preventing acts of coercion and violence with violence. If you go and try to catch a tiger, the tiger's not going to be very happy with you. So there are certain kinds of interference that I believe are perfectly reasonable and okay to take to interfere with survival and evolution. Even wearing clothes and creating enclosures and heating systems, these are all forms of interference, where we are taking an action that interferes with our evolution. I always think of everything in terms of very, very long term. I think about the actions we're taking today and how they would affect us 1,000 years from now. And no one can deny that a lot of the things that we have done to interfere with our survival, or we could rephrase that by saying everything that we have done to make our survival more likely, has definitely extended the reach of the species, has made us as large as we are. But some of these interferences have made us weaker. Just take a device like this. I didn't start using a smartphone until my mom gave me her old phone a couple of years ago. And so I was very late to the game with smartphones. And just in that 2-year period, I'm finding myself losing my sense of direction, or it's just not even having one. So if I'm out traveling in the car, I can't help but rely on the map application on this thing. Whereas I used to just kind of feel my way through things, or I could use a physical map. I would get lost, but I would pull over to some gas station and ask for directions. But just in the last 2 years of using this device, which is a massive interference with our evolution, it empowers us on one end, but on the other end, it weakens us and it debilitates us. So we need to be mindful and careful about the things we bring into our life as individuals and therefore as a species. And vaccines are a form of interference. that is where I personally have decided to draw the line. Now, I do believe there is a good case to be made for why I might be wrong, and I'd like to explain both of them right now. Let's start with why a vaccine might be the proper solution to the problem it addresses. Well, yes, it is a very unnatural form of interference with your evolution, in that you're bypassing all of the systems that your body has developed to protect itself from foreign agents that could damage the body by directly injecting it into the bloodstream. And it is unnatural for sure. But the problem is we live in an unnatural world. You're surrounded by metals that can corrode and puncture you, and that is not something that your evolution as a human being, as a mammal, has prepared you for. So the only way to solve for living in an unnatural state is with unnatural solutions. And so that, to me, is the most compelling argument for why vaccines may be the only proper course of action. Now, on the other hand, do we really want to figure out ways of adapting to an unhealthy way of living? Or do we want evolution to take its course so that it causes the correction in and of itself, and not to artificially create systems that allow us to persist in an unhealthy system? I'd rather the unhealthy system fall away and perish. And yeah, that means a lot of suffering would ensue. But to continue to perpetuate the wrongness and thereby delaying the suffering that wrongness is owed is morally wrong, in my opinion. All you're doing is you're borrowing from your children or your children's children's lives by doing that, because eventually the check is going to get cashed. And so, in my opinion, if the unnatural world that we have created for us is so toxic that we need to introduce more toxins into our life in order to allow us to persist within such a system, I don't want to have it. I don't want to participate in that. I would rather perish myself. I would rather fall away and die. Even though I'm not responsible for the system that the collection of all of my ancestors built, but I am responsible for whether I choose to perpetuate it, or whether I choose to adapt to it and find happiness within it. And so my personal stance is to not take any vaccines, because they are too unnatural of a solution for a problem that I would rather nature take care of. And so if I do get sick, I would rather take the chance of going through the sickness and hopefully coming through the other end with some natural immunity. Now, viruses are severely misunderstood. People think of viruses as a bad thing, and so it's hard to now talk about them because the word virus itself is so contaminated. So try to forget all the meanings associated with virus and replace that word with something like a super tiny particle that lives on your cells. So maybe I'll use that from now on. These super tiny particles that live on your cells, they can range anywhere from 50 to 400 nanomicrons. It's really tiny. To give you a sense of how small that is, a sheet of paper is 100 microns thick. And if you zoom into 1 micron, 1/100th the width of a sheet of paper, that's 1,000 nanomicrons. And it's within that range that you can see, you'd be able to start to see different viruses. The coronavirus itself averages out to be about 100 nanomicrons. That's how tiny these little particles are. And these particles don't want to kill you. They really have nothing against you. There are over 300 trillion particles, of these virus particles in your body. And any human being at any one time, if you were to look in their body, you would be able to count or estimate almost 400 trillion. It's 380 trillion is what the scientific community currently estimates, which is 10 times the amount of bacteria that is in your body. And so to think of viruses as this, again, to think about these tiny particles as a foreign agent or as something that is wrong or that is not supposed to be in your body is just fundamentally wrong. They are part of us, and they have been for who knows how long. Viruses might be the reason life exists. And I really mean that. I think they are incredibly important to our evolution. So these little entities aren't really looking to kill you. You are their source of life. That's all it is. And they want to persist and multiply and proliferate. It's a very similar fractal manifestation of the relationship between human beings and the planet. Not even just any mammals, any roaming creatures on this earth, cats, dogs, horses, pigs, all these creatures are roaming this body that we call Earth and consuming its resources and dying and fertilizing the earth. Extracting, human beings have enormous powers of similar to ants which aerate the soil. Humans are doing major sifting of resource on the planet, of taking things that are deep down and pulling them up onto the surface. We're all participating on this earth. All of the mammals on this earth are participating and playing their role and their part in the evolution of the planet itself. And if you actually measure the average size of a virus and the average size of a mammal, which we could say maybe would be about this, let's say this, maybe this big, and the size relationship between virus to mammal and mammal to earth is almost identical. I actually went through and I did the math and figured out that you can line up about as many humans around the earth as you can viruses around your waistline. And it's maybe a child, let's say. So not a full-grown human, but a child. And so it's important that we look at this critically and realistically, and we understand that viruses aren't really something to fundamentally be afraid of. You have close to 400 trillion in your body, okay, right now. In terms of how many strands of viruses you have, probably around 5, So here's what happens. If, let's say, sorry for all the cuts. I've been dealing with some sort of infection or allergies that's giving me a really itchy nose. And interestingly, I only started feeling these weird itchy symptoms in November of 2019, and it's persisted since then. That was exactly when, or right about the time that we started hearing about the coronavirus in China. And so it was a weird synchronicity of events. However, it kind of ties into what I'm talking about now, because that was right about when I turned 40. And at 40, you really start to feel your body decaying and how much more sensitive your body is to whatever is already in your body. Because here's what happens. Once you become infected or exposed to a new strand, a new virus of some kind, that virus could potentially live inside of your body and have maybe just a few hundred members to its community, let's say. It's probably more like a couple trillion, but it's just living its life, multiplying. The population is staying in check because your immune system, whenever it detects a cell becoming overburdened by some of these particles, it destroys the cell, and you get what we call sick, and you start to have symptoms. But most of the viruses are going undetected in your body because they don't want to be detected. They just want to be able to live off of you, and they don't want to hurt you. And but as you age, your immune system weakens, and so the ability of your body to detect when that cell starts to become crowded with viruses diminishes. Just like our eyesight diminishes as we age and things become blurrier and our mind slows down, your immune system is going through the same process. And so all of a sudden you'll have cells that get really covered up in viruses, and only then will the immune system detect it, by which point it might be too late to do anything about it. And even the act of doing something about it, which is to destroy those cells, is so immensely destructive to yourself that the symptoms and the experience that you go through is potentially excruciating and potentially lethal too. And so that's why the older we get, the weaker we become, and it's inevitable that some virus will take over during that time of our life and lead to pneumonia-like symptoms, respiratory problems, heart problems, all sorts of issues that have probably become aggravated by these viruses multiplying and causing the damage that comes about when your immune system attacks that healthy tissue. And so that's fundamentally what's going on. And so this idea that we need to be in control of viruses, I think, is silly. And let's say somehow we were able to control viruses. Like, for example, Bill Gates is now promoting this idea of synthetic antibodies that he wants to put in your body as little microscopic, biologically engineered antibodies. So these would be kind of like the weapons of your immune system to attack viruses. And again, I go back to my original argument about how unnatural do you want to become in order for you to adapt to this unnatural world. And viruses aren't even unnatural, unless, of course, they're engineered, which is a real thing for sure, or not even engineered. Sometimes viruses are generated through where they kind of incubate them and allowed to just evolve with different environmental pressures to generate a particular strand that might be able to survive certain weather conditions and things like that. So there are ways in which this can be done. And of course, there's a lot of speculation about whether or not the coronavirus was generated in this way, where they took an existing virus and then hyper-evolved it to be the super predator that it is. I personally think a lot of what is in the news and what we're told is misdirection, misinformation, sleight of hand, and it's kind of a magic trick. They're trying to get away with doing something over here while pointing at something that's happening over there. It's definitely not to be trusted. But regardless of what the case may be, I would rather be a human being that accepts the consequences of these actions rather than try to adapt to them. I think too much of science has been devoting its efforts to help us get away with our terrible actions. Some would call these actions sinful, but whether you're religious or not, I think we can all agree that a lot of the things that we have done and the systems that we have built and the methods by which we have extended our survival have been wrong. And I don't want to participate in perpetuating that wrongness by figuring out a way of making it easier to for our life to persist within that wrongness. I would rather live a life that accepts the consequences of it and pays that price, and hopefully begins to lay the groundwork for a new generation that doesn't have to pay that price, and that generation can learn that way from those mistakes, so that rather than creating systems that allow you to persist in a wrong system, it lets that system fall apart so that a new system can be built that is more ethical and more humane. But if I want to even take a stand against natural viruses, whom I believe are fundamentally responsible for us even existing, I don't think we would even have something called an immune system if it weren't for these viruses, and therefore we wouldn't really have survived as long as we have as a species. I don't want to take a stand against that. I don't think there is something there that needs to be corrected. I think what needs to be corrected is the artificial generation of viruses. And I don't want that to persist. I don't want any more engineering to take place that goes inside of our bodies. I am for the most part okay with manipulating our external world in ways that one might deem artificial, like the production of metallic objects, for example. But I draw the line at my skin barrier. And if someone comes to me and forces me to take a vaccine, I would just say, my body, my choice. That is the one area that we must all protect our sovereignty in. We should always have control over the food we put in our mouth. We should always have control over anything that penetrates our skin. And to the extent possible, of course, things like contaminants in the air are definite issues, and we don't have as much control over those. But the things that you do have control over with your body, you should be the sovereign of that domain. And that's how I feel about vaccines and about viruses in general. Viruses are not unnatural unless they're produced in a lab. And there is a case to be made for when vaccines are important and valuable, and a case to be made when all they do is they help sin and wrongness persist. And so if I ever feel that I'm doing something that helps a wrongness persist, I don't want to be a part of it. And so my objection to this latest vaccine is more moral than it is at all scientific. That's why I take a very religious exception to vaccines. And I think that what I've expressed probably matches what a lot of other people feel and think, but I don't hear anybody talking about it in this way. All I hear is very negative framing of the so-called anti-vaxxing community, and where they always bring up these things like the negative symptoms that their children have experienced after taking vaccines, which I personally think is quite possibly true. I don't know if those particular claims are true, but lately I've been feeling that allergies may largely be caused by vaccines when those vaccines are administered to infants. I think putting foreign agents into a newborn at that early stage of its development is incredibly wrong, and I could definitely see how that would short circuit the immune system of that human being, because there's a lot of immunity that still needs to be developed through the breastfeeding process and just from being exposed to the outside world for the first time. So if you are going to be pursuing just the general course of vaccination, I would highly recommend waiting until the child is much older, maybe at least 5 years old, and not doing them all at once. The CDC recommends a cocktail of like 30 vaccines that you're supposed to take. And a lot of these expire, so you have to boost them every 5 or 8 years. Some are yearly, like the flu. And I'm sure the coronavirus will be the exact same thing. You'll have to get a booster shot every year. But if you are going to be pursuing vaccines, wait until the body has developed a stronger immune system so you don't hijack some of the natural things that the immune system is doing at an early stage to just get its footing in your body. That's what I would suggest. Anyway, I hope this was useful. If what I said resonates with you, let me know. I'd love to know who else is out there that feels this way. If you object and you think that what I'm saying is completely wrong, let me know as well. Just keep it nice, keep it polite. Let's have a good, healthy conversation. Bullies will not be allowed on this channel or part of my life at all, as you saw in one of my last videos. So anyway, I hope your year is going well. I'm going to see if I can kick these allergies or this itch that I've got. And hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye.